Welcome to Workday Finance Processing Supplier Invoices. In this session, we'll explore supplier invoice creation related to accounts payable business transactions. We'll also discuss supplier invoice adjustments and the impact of invoice matching. Before you can create and process supplier invoices in Workday, you must have the proper supplier setup. A Workday administrator must set up the supplier invoice event business process and security policy in the supplier accounts functional area and assign you to the AP data entry specialist role. Then you can begin creating supplier invoices. When you make purchases from a vendor, Workday sends a sales invoice or bill to the buyer. Workday allows you to create a supplier invoice to generate payment for goods and services. We now have the proper role assignment. We'll start by reviewing the methods to create supplier invoices. AP data entry specialists can create supplier invoices manually, copy an existing supplier invoice, or use the supplier invoice workbench. It's important to note that entering a supplier invoice in Workday enables you to record a purchase and create the associated payables accounting. Based on the spend categories used on the invoice lines, the account posting rules in Workday automatically create operational journals for all approved transactions. Within the supplier invoice are the header details to include the invoice information, terms and taxes, and invoice reference information sections. Most of these fields default from the supplier object itself, but you can override them if necessary. If you choose a purchase item, typically the item description, spend category, tax, and cost information default into the line from the item. If the remit to connection field is a prompt, it means that the supplier has supplier connections. If you want added data entry validation, Workday will match the total of all invoice line amounts entered to the amount in the Control Total Amount field. You can add the supplier invoice number in the supplier's invoice number field. If you enable the supplier document received field, the supplier's invoice number field becomes required. Invoice lines provide details for the lines of the supplied bills or invoices. A supplier invoice contains one to many lines. Additional tabs are Tax for tax codes and applicability on the invoice lines, Prepaid details, which defines an invoice line as prepaid and specifies the prepaid amortization type, and Attachments to attach supporting invoice documents. After entering all lines, submit the supplier invoice. Workday will create a payment for the invoice, which typically requires an approval. Depending on your company's setup, the supplier invoice approval may route through the management chain of the supervisory organization. The cost center manager can approve or send the invoices back to the originator without changing the invoices. The approver will have the following options, which dictate your available next steps. Approve, which moves the transaction to the next step. Send back, which allows the approver to enter a comment and send the invoice back to the originator for review and updating. Add approvers to the event while in process. Deny the invoice and enter a reason for denying it. And finally, they can cancel the transaction. In addition to creating one-off supplier invoices, you can set up recurring invoices. Workday allows you to model recurring payments for things like rental agreements and leases. Creating recurring supplier invoices is a two-part process. First, set up a recurring supplier invoice template. This process will not generate an invoice. Once you have the template, create an invoice referencing the template. You can perform this process manually or automatically using a scheduler. The Create Recurring Supplier Invoice task is similar to the Create Supplier Invoice task. The invoice information section of the header is the same. However, the Terms and Amounts section is different. In Terms and Amounts, you must specify an invoice frequency type, which would be value such as daily or monthly. Once you generate a supplier invoice, Workday allows you to adjust the invoice to increase or decrease the amount owed. Use the Create Supplier Invoice Adjustment task or the Related Actions menu for a specific invoice. When making an adjustment, you must provide an adjustment reason and date. Adjustment reasons are tentative data, so your company can configure the available reasons. Workday automatically creates operational journals for approved adjustment transactions. When viewing the invoices for a company, you will notice a separate line item for adjustments. In addition to creating and adjusting invoices, you can use the Supplier Invoice work area to track and manage supplier invoices in draft status in a single place. This is helpful when you input many supplier invoices into Workday via a scanning software or import the transactions to a draft status. You can prioritize, assign, and set up rules for invoices, as well as correct electronic data interchange invoices in error. You can create work queue tags on the Maintain Supplier Invoice Work Queue Tags task to prioritize supplier invoices according to company requirements. Create work queue tag assignment rules on the Maintain Supplier Invoice Work Queue Tag Assignment Rules task by selecting and classifying the work queue tags based on payment terms, supplier category, supplier group, and more. Set up supplier invoice routing to send invoices to a specific assignee by creating and prioritizing invoice assignment rules on the Maintain Supplier Invoice Assignment Rules task. In addition to using the supplier invoice work area, Workday provides invoice matching. The term matching describes how procurement documents match against each other to ensure accuracy of prices negotiated and quantities received. Some companies may be willing to pay a supplier invoice without having an exact match on price or quantity. If the price or quantity differences fall within a predefined tolerance, you can define matching within a tolerance range. The tolerance can be a percentage or a dollar amount. You can make 2, 3, and 4-way match comparisons in Workday at the line, split, or header levels, or a combination of all three. To have complete matching, in addition to defining match rules and tolerances, users need to be able to override these match exceptions. Depending on your business process, an administrator can configure match condition rules to allow for 3-way or 2-way matching. They can also configure match exception reasons, route match exceptions, and match overrides for approval. Once the invoice is approved and matched, you can review the accounting. With Workday transactions, the operational transaction is separate from the accounting. You can complete an operational transaction even if the accounts are set up in error, or Workday can't find an open period. This process is transparent to the operational user. Therefore, if you enter a supplier invoice in a closed period, Workday looks for an open period to enter the transaction. Workday can still process the invoice and make the payment. If Workday can't find an open period, then it generates a transaction accounting error. An accountant can fix these errors by opening a period and using the Fixed Operational Journals with Errors task to reprocess the accounting into an open period. Now that we have reviewed supplier invoices, let's demonstrate how to create and review one. Meet Nathan Moore, an AP data entry specialist for Global Modern Services. Nathan will create a supplier invoice for GMS USA breakfasts provided to employees. He will split the costs so the cost center managers can report on each of their costs accurately. Nathan will also review the accounting for the invoice. Now, Kai will demonstrate Nathan creating a supplier invoice by splitting the costs by quantity.
As Nathan Moore, I'll navigate to the Create Supplier Invoice task. Notice the required fields that I must populate. First, I'll enter the company's supplier and supplier's invoice number. On the invoice line grid, I'll select an item and quantity. Now, I'll scroll to the right and select the Splits button, and choose to split by quantity. Adding 2 rows for the split, I'll enter the quantity and work tags. For this demonstration, the work tags will be the 2 cost centers I'm splitting the cost for. Finally, I'll submit the supplier invoice for approval. For this demonstration, the supplier invoice will route from the AP Data Entry Specialist to the Cost Center Manager for review and approval. Now that the invoice is approved, you can review the accounting.
In this session, we've reviewed supplier invoice details and setup, as well as invoice lines, routing, and the approval process and how they impact supplier invoice accounting. Thank you for taking the time to learn with Workday.